Hello from Daily Moral Story. Welcome to today's inspiring tale. He almost walked past the sleek glass doors without pausing. They looked elegant, reflecting the midday sun, yet he felt an odd detachment as he approached them. Maurice Green, a tall man with a warm brown complexion and quiet confidence, wore simple jeans and a faded hoodie. Normally, he traveled in tailored suits, commanding respect from staff who recognized his role as the CEO of this growing hotel chain. Today, though, he arrived incognito, determined to see firsthand why complaints had piled up about rude service, neglected amenities, and a puzzling policy that allegedly turned away local residents. This property, located in a busy downtown district, was one of several he had acquired over the past few years. His father had founded the original brand with a vision of inclusive hospitality, a principle Maurice was raised to uphold. Yet something had changed in the month since he'd last visited. He heard rumors of a harsh policy that banned city locals from renting rooms, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. Inside, the lobby sparkled with polished marble floors, a modern chandelier, and a neatly arranged row of plants. Soft music played overhead, conveying a veneer of refinement. At the reception desk, a young clerk named Ian peered at his computer screen, barely looking up when Maurice approached. Maurice offered his ID and requested a room for 2 nights. Ian glanced at the document, noticing the local address, and pursed his lips. "I'm sorry, sir," he muttered. "We don't rent to people who live in town." Confusion flashed across Maurice's face. He pressed Ian for an explanation. The clerk repeated that management forbade reservations for local residents, suggesting Maurice book elsewhere. Maurice's stomach tightened. He kept his voice polite, attempting to confirm the hotel had vacancies. Ian confirmed they did, but restated the policy, adding that it was necessary to avoid problems. Maurice felt a surge of frustration. His family's name was behind this establishment, and yet they were excluding patrons based on assumptions. A presence loomed behind Ian, a man in a crisp navy suit with a name tag reading, "Lucas Patterson, General Manager." Patterson looked Maurice up and down, crossing his arms. "We don't accept local guests," he said coolly. "It's how we maintain our standards." Maurice tried not to reveal his shock. Without identifying himself, he simply thanked them for their time, turned on his heel, and stepped back into the bright afternoon sun, determined to unearth the reasons behind this disgraceful practice. Standing outside, he felt both anger and sadness roiling within. How could a hotel bearing his father's vision adopt such an exclusionary stance? Deciding not to blow his cover, he stepped away, found a spot near the entrance, and called another hotel nearby to book a room. He would return tomorrow, but not as a guest. He planned to apply for a job, hoping to see from the inside just how mismanaged the place was. For now, he just needed to process the magnitude of this problem. Early the next morning, Maurice entered the same lobby wearing similar clothes, the same hoodie, worn sneakers, and a casual posture. He spotted a different clerk at the reception, a young woman with curly hair whose name tag read Rebecca. She appeared more alert than Ian had been, juggling phone calls and a line of guests in front of her. After she finished checking in an older couple, Maurice stepped forward and politely asked if the hotel was hiring. Her gaze flickered with curiosity, and she told him they were short-staffed. She suggested he speak to the assistant manager, Pamela Clark, who might take walk-ins given their urgent need for help. Maurice thanked her. He noticed the subdued atmosphere. The employees moved dutifully, but there was no spark of warmth in their interactions. Crossing the lobby, he caught fragments of conversation. A guest complaining about a billing error, another lamenting that the elevator was out of order. No one seemed to address these concerns with genuine care. Maurice understood that a single manager's attitude could poison the entire environment, making staff fearful or apathetic. He headed down a narrow corridor to the small office labeled Administration. Inside, a woman in her early 40s sat at a cluttered desk, typing furiously. Her hair was pinned in a tight bun, and a line of worry creased her forehead. Her name tag read Pamela Clark, Assistant Manager. Glancing up, she asked Maurice if he needed something. He mentioned looking for a position, citing past front desk and housekeeping experience. She sighed, pulling out an application form from a drawer. "We've had a lot of turnover," she admitted. If you're willing to start immediately, you might be useful." He filled out the paperwork with a false backstory, using an out-of-town address. He hoped they wouldn't check references too closely. Once done, she glanced over the form, then eyed him. "I can't promise anything long-term," she said, "but we need someone now." Maurice offered a small nod, playing the role of a desperate job seeker. He followed her through the staff hallway, passing dingy break rooms and supply closets. Pamela explained that housekeeping was understaffed and the front desk was overwhelmed, especially during check-in hours. Maurice noticed a bored-looking employee leaning against a wall, checking his phone as crates of supplies remained untouched nearby. Nobody seemed motivated. Pamela introduced Maurice to Rebecca, instructing them to work together at the desk for the afternoon. Rebecca looked relieved to have help, guiding him through the ancient reservation system. She mentioned how often reservations got lost or double-booked because management refused to upgrade the software. Darius, another front desk agent, grumbled about the upcoming rush. "We're booked solid, but half the staff might call out," he said. Maurice observed that morale was low. Overhearing a phone call, he heard someone complaining about housekeeping never arriving to clean their room. Rebecca tried to calm the caller, scribbling notes on a worn pad. Maurice could see how chaos had become the norm. No one was stepping up to fix root problems. Despite the elegant lobby, the operation felt disjointed. Around midday, Lucas Patterson strode through, wearing the same navy suit. He barely glanced at the employees, speaking curtly to Pamela before disappearing into his office. Rebecca exhaled once he was gone, whispering to Maurice that Patterson avoided real engagement, blaming staff whenever guests complained. Maurice absorbed all of it, determined to see just how deep the issues ran. Late in the afternoon, Rebecca mentioned they were short on housekeeping staff. Maurice volunteered to help, saying he had done similar work in the past. She led him to Glenn, a middle-aged man pushing a trolley stacked with linens and cleaning supplies. Glenn greeted Maurice with a half-tired nod, explaining how understaffed they were. "We used to have a bigger team," Glenn muttered, "but they all quit. Management never replaced them, so we can't keep up." Rooms sometimes remained unclean for hours after checkout, leading to constant guest complaints. As they worked, Glenn confided that nobody felt heard. He said Patterson would dismiss any plea for extra help, claiming the hotel had to cut costs. Maurice saw the toll it took on Glenn, who looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. By the time they finished cleaning the last occupied room on their list, evening had fallen. Maurice returned to the lobby, glimpsing a furious guest demanding to speak to the manager because her reservation had vanished. Darius, exasperated, tried to shuffle through piles of paperwork but couldn't find the booking. The woman threatened to post a scathing review. Patterson finally emerged, exchanging pleasantries without addressing her concern. Instead, he berated Darius for not keeping things under control. The woman stormed off in disgust, leaving Darius visibly shaken. Maurice noted the pattern. Patterson never fixed the root problems, just scolded his staff. That night, Maurice slipped out quietly and headed to his temporary room at another hotel 2 blocks away. From there, he read through old performance reports. On paper, the property seemed to meet basic targets, but he suspected Patterson was spinning data to mask deeper failings. It unnerved him that an outwardly upscale establishment was so dysfunctional behind the scenes. He remembered his father's words. "A hotel is more than a building. It's a place where people find respite. If we fail them, we fail ourselves." Those words fueled Maurice's resolve to confront this situation. First, though, he wanted more proof of the everyday neglect. Over the next 2 days, he split his time between front desk tasks, housekeeping, and mingling with maintenance staff. He learned the maintenance team was equally disgruntled. Jerome, the lead, explained how requests got ignored because Patterson didn't want unnecessary expenses. The entire building was on the brink of breakdown. Maurice's frustration grew. It was time to act. On the 4th morning, Maurice decided to confront Patterson directly. Having gathered enough first-hand evidence, he walked into the manager's office without knocking, bracing himself for confrontation. Patterson looked up from his desk, face twisting into a scowl. He asked what Maurice wanted. Maurice laid out the problem systematically, from the local band to the understaffed departments. He spoke calmly, though his voice trembled with indignation. "You're driving away customers," Maurice said. "Employees are overworked, and your rules discriminate against the very community you serve." Patterson scoffed, refusing to accept any blame. "Locals cause trouble," he insisted, reeling off anecdotes about rowdy parties. "We do things my way." Maurice folded his arms. "That's a violation of corporate values. I know because I set them." Patterson's eyebrows rose in confusion. Maurice dropped the facade, stating his full name and title: Maurice Green, CEO and majority owner of this hotel chain. He'd come undercover, witnessing how this location treated customers and staff alike. Patterson's face went pale. He sputtered excuses, claiming the local ban was necessary and the employees were lazy. Maurice remained stoic, explaining how the neglect began at the top, with leadership that dismissed staff needs. "I inherited this chain from my father," Maurice said, voice firm. "He built our reputation on respect and fairness. You've turned it into a place that alienates guests and demoralizes employees. That ends today." Patterson tried to deflect blame, insisting he had saved money by cutting staff. Maurice shook his head. "You saved costs, short-term, and lost our core values. That's unacceptable." Without waiting for further protest, Maurice demanded Patterson leave immediately. "You're fired," he declared, ignoring the man's astonished protests. Maurice stepped out of the office, finding several employees gathered nearby. They must have overheard. Clearing his throat, he addressed the stunned group, including Rebecca, Glenn, and Darius. "Effective now, Mr. Patterson is no longer with the company," Maurice said calmly. "Changes start today." A hush fell over the employees. Some looked relieved, others wary. Maurice promised them that the discriminatory policy against local guests would be scrapped, that they would receive better support, and that he would remain on site until the hotel got back on track. At an impromptu staff meeting in the cramped break room, Maurice officially introduced himself. The hush continued as he explained why he'd come undercover. He wanted to see reality unfiltered, and what he discovered horrified him. Housekeeping was overworked and underpaid, maintenance requests were ignored, front desk staff felt powerless, and management refused rooms to locals based on biased assumptions. Maurice apologized for letting things devolve and vowed to address their concerns. He then asked the employees to speak freely. Glenn stepped forward, pointing out how shorthanded housekeeping had become, causing them to skim important details. Jerome from maintenance mentioned malfunctioning equipment that never got replaced. Rebecca, voice trembling slightly, thanked Maurice for listening, adding that the front desk needed better tools and clarity to handle unexpected guest issues. Darius quietly admitted that Patterson's micromanagement made him resentful. He apologized for his earlier behavior, explaining he felt no incentive to go the extra mile. Maurice took it all in. "I see how leadership failures created this environment," he said. "Starting immediately, we'll provide resources for housekeeping and maintenance. We're also investing in improved reservation software. And local customers are welcome without question." He paused, recalling his father's lifelong emphasis on community and fairness. "I won't permit any discrimination here. We're here to serve, not to judge." Next, he addressed the staffing crisis. "You're all stretched too thin," he observed. "We'll hire new people, but we'll also raise wages to competitive levels so we can keep good workers." A ripple of surprised relief coursed through the room. They'd heard empty promises before, but Maurice's sincerity was palpable. He appointed Pamela Clark as interim general manager, though he warned her that she had to prove her commitment to inclusive leadership. She nodded earnestly, confessing that she'd been too afraid of Patterson to speak up. "I'll do better," she promised. Outside that meeting, the lobby felt lighter, as though the oppressive tension had eased. Maurice invited everyone to approach him with questions. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly, coordinating with corporate headquarters to secure additional funds for wage increases. He personally oversaw housekeeping schedules, ensuring no one was stuck working relentless hours without support. He also met with the maintenance crew, authorizing overdue repairs. The difference was immediate. Glenn no longer looked perpetually exhausted, and Jerome seemed excited to address long-standing mechanical issues. Rebecca found renewed confidence at the front desk, guiding guests with a friendly attitude that was finally reciprocated by management. She helped train a couple of new hires, focusing on empathy and problem-solving. Darius, while initially skeptical, realized that good leadership meant he had space to handle guest issues creatively. He began greeting arrivals with an actual smile, offering help instead of deferring everything. Meanwhile, Pamela set about revising the staff policies, removing the local ban from every manual or memo. She posted a note clarifying that the hotel welcomed guests from any location, asking employees to embrace this change wholeheartedly. Yet old habits die hard. Some employees who thrived under Patterson's strictness looked unsettled, worried they'd lose their influence. Maurice held private discussions with them, explaining that the new approach was non-negotiable. If they refused, they could leave. A few quietly submitted resignations, but more stayed, intrigued by the possibility of a fairer workplace. One afternoon, Maurice met Linda from reservations, who had stuck around behind the scenes. She confessed that she tried to fix booking issues but was often overruled by Patterson. She had nearly quit, but his firing gave her hope. "I like the hospitality industry," she said. "I just hated the environment here." Maurice assured her that environment was changing. He asked if she'd be interested in leading a new training program to ensure fewer booking errors. Surprised, she agreed, thankful for the recognition. Maurice also reached out to local businesses, many of whom had stopped recommending the hotel to travelers. He apologized for the past mismanagement and asked for a second chance. Some owners were skeptical, recalling how local patrons were turned away. Maurice explained the new policies, even inviting them to see the improvements for themselves. Over time, a few accepted his olive branch, pleased to see genuine efforts to make amends. Back in the lounge, a new energy thrived among staff. Where once a sense of dread had weighed everyone down, a cautious optimism emerged. Employees formed small committees to discuss creative ways to enhance guest experiences, something unheard of under Patterson. From housekeeping to the cafe staff, they pitched ideas for local partnerships and improved amenities. Maurice listened, praising their initiative. Determined to restore the brand's reputation, he poured resources into marketing that highlighted inclusivity and top-tier service. He believed that by treating employees well, the hotel would naturally deliver better experiences for guests. A week into these changes, Maurice gathered everyone for a progress report in the lobby. He stood near a decorative fountain addressing the employees, housekeepers, receptionists, maintenance workers, cafe attendants, and new hires alike. He acknowledged the initial chaos but praised their collective effort. Complaints had dropped, rooms were cleaned more thoroughly, and no one was turned away for having a local address. The staff erupted into applause when he announced that new uniforms and software upgrades were on the way. Maurice also reminded them of the underlying principles. "We're here to serve with dignity, not discriminate. If we keep that front and center, we'll succeed." After the meeting, Glenn approached him, smiling for the first time Maurice had seen. "Been here 5 years," Glenn said, "and I never felt appreciated until now." "Thank you." Maurice shook his hand, reaffirming that housekeeping was the backbone of a good hotel. Later, Jerome showed Maurice a replaced water heater that had caused issues for months. "Used to just patch things up," Jerome said. "Now I can actually fix them right." Maurice grinned, heartened by these tangible improvements. Some guests also noticed the shift. An older couple, who stayed regularly for medical visits, remarked that staff treated them with unusual kindness this time. They praised Rebecca for her polite efficiency. Another guest mentioned that housekeeping responded to a broken coffee machine in minutes, a stark contrast to prior complaints of no follow-up. The positive reviews began trickling in online, praising the freshly renewed atmosphere. One post even mentioned the disappearance of that no locals rule, commending the hotel for welcoming a wide range of patrons. Maurice felt a rush of pride. Yet, he reminded himself this was just the beginning. True cultural change required steady follow-through. He kept a close eye on financials, ensuring the wage hikes and system upgrades would be sustainable. A balanced approach meant the hotel's occupancy numbers had to improve, but with the renewed reputation, that seemed feasible. In the midst of these transformations, he thought of his late father's ideals: inclusivity, respect, genuine care. These words reverberated in his mind every time he saw employees collaborating or guests smiling in relief. If his father were alive, he would be proud of this turnaround. Observing the busy front desk, Maurice caught Rebecca expertly handling a tricky reservation with a traveler who had lost his credit card. She found a way to verify his information, letting him check in without hassle. That small gesture of empathy stood in direct contrast to the old practice of telling guests to go elsewhere. Now guests felt valued. The entire hotel felt reborn. Word spread through the corporate ranks. Other managers at different locations reached out, curious about how Maurice had orchestrated such a quick overhaul. He humbly explained that listening and leadership were key. He also admitted that going undercover revealed truths he might never have seen from a distance. Some requested that he visit their properties too to ensure no similar rot had set in. Maurice agreed to schedule periodic audits, realizing transparency was a powerful tool. Meanwhile, the local community began to soften. Residents who had once sworn off the hotel slowly returned. Some booked rooms for family reunions, others used the meeting spaces for local events. The staff, no longer restricted by Patterson's prejudice, embraced these local guests. Pamela worked on marketing that highlighted community partnerships, encouraging neighbors to think of the hotel as a resource rather than a hostile fortress. She seemed more genuine each day, stepping out of her office to chat with employees, ensuring they had what they needed. She confided in Maurice that she'd always felt compassion for the staff, but was too afraid to contradict Patterson's directives. Now she wanted to prove her worth as a real leader. Over a cup of coffee, Maurice advised her, "Real leadership isn't about fear. It's about showing respect and setting high standards while giving people the tools to meet them." She nodded, taking notes. Late one evening, Maurice sat in the break room alone, recalling a deeply personal memory of his father. As a child, he watched the elder Green give a free night's stay to a homeless veteran who had approached their small inn. It had been a quiet act of kindness, done without fanfare or marketing motives. That was the spirit behind their brand, helping people in need. Yet here, at this hotel, staff had turned away locals simply because of prejudice. Maurice felt a pang of regret for letting such a policy fester under his watch. The next day, he gathered staff for a pep talk in the lounge, sharing that childhood memory. "We stand for hospitality," he said, voice steady, "which means serving our community, not excluding it." He asked if anyone had stories of compassion they wanted to bring to their daily work. Rebecca spoke up, saying she once covered a shift for a struggling coworker without telling anyone just because it felt right. Glenn recounted how he used to spend extra time cleaning the rooms of elderly guests, ensuring their comfort. These anecdotes reminded everyone of the core mission, caring about people. Days stretched into weeks, and the hotel's reputation improved steadily. Business travelers began returning, drawn by word of mouth that the place had reformed. Families felt welcome, and local patrons reserved rooms for staycations or visiting relatives. Maurice noticed a ripple effect. Employees walked with more confidence, new hires spoke positively about the environment, and guests left appreciative notes. The local newspapers even ran a short piece on how the property had turned over a new leaf, quoting satisfied patrons. Maurice took care to never appear complacent. He continued daily check-ins with each department, from housekeeping to the kitchen that provided room service. If a new problem arose, he addressed it immediately. He also reminded Pamela to keep focusing on training and empowerment. "We can't slip back into old patterns," he cautioned. She agreed. He realized that leadership required vigilance. Meanwhile, Darius, once the most jaded desk agent, seemed to relish problem-solving opportunities, assisting guests with real enthusiasm. Jerome, in maintenance, proudly shared how he'd reorganized the supply area, making repairs more efficient. Linda, who managed reservations, finally had the proper tools to keep the system updated. And Glenn, no longer perpetually behind schedule, began tidying each room with meticulous care. One afternoon, a boisterous family walked in without a reservation, asking for 2 adjacent rooms. Under the old regime, such arrivals might have sparked tension, but Rebecca welcomed them calmly, found suitable accommodations, and arranged for extra bedding. Watching from the side, Maurice felt a sense of accomplishment. These were the daily interactions that shaped the hotel's reputation. He reminded himself that the bigger victory was intangible, a staff that cared enough to adapt. Midway through the month, Maurice sent an email to the entire corporate structure, detailing how the changes at this location increased guest satisfaction and staff morale. He urged other managers to review their policies, especially regarding local residents, to ensure no hidden discrimination existed. Some replied with concerns about potential risks. Maurice patiently countered that the real risk lay in fostering resentment and losing trust. "Hospitality means open doors," he wrote. "It's not just about revenue." He planned visits to other locations, but he wanted to stay here a bit longer to ensure the progress held. He had come to realize that superficial fixes could fade if not nurtured, and he was determined to guard the spirit of fairness he'd reignited. Observing the new synergy, he felt hopeful. Amid these positive developments, Maurice remained vigilant for lingering resistance. A few long-time employees might still harbor old biases, but he found that transparency helped. By holding regular staff meetings and encouraging open dialogue, employees felt their voices mattered. Discontent had nowhere to hide, so it found healthier expression. Whenever a conflict arose, Pamela or Maurice addressed it promptly, making sure everyone understood the hotel's commitment to inclusivity. One such conflict surfaced when a front desk trainee hesitated to rent to a local young couple, citing security concerns. Rebecca quickly intervened, explaining the updated approach. Maurice spoke with the trainee, clarifying that prejudice wasn't acceptable. The trainee apologized, admitting he'd heard old rumors about locals causing trouble. It showed how deeply ingrained Patterson's toxic culture had been. Slowly, though, they dismantled it. Another day, a local non-profit called, requesting a discounted block of rooms for visiting volunteers. Instead of refusing, Pamela authorized a reasonable group rate, even offering a complimentary conference room. The non-profit director was stunned, knowing the hotel's previous reputation. The volunteers arrived, some from neighboring states, praising the hotel's courtesy. Word spread, drawing more goodwill from community organizations. On a personal level, Maurice felt a renewed connection to his father's legacy. During quiet moments, he remembered the stories his father told him about traveling as a young black entrepreneur, facing discrimination in certain establishments, and vowing to create inclusive spaces for all. That vow became the bedrock of their brand. Maurice realized he had nearly lost sight of that while expanding, trusting the wrong managers to uphold those principles. Yet now, watching employees treat guests with genuine compassion, he felt their core mission restored. He also took a moment to ask himself, and by extension anyone witnessing his journey, how many of us overlook cultural decay in our own organizations until it's almost too late? Perhaps real leadership involves stepping into the heart of the operation, listening and acting decisively. His undercover experience proved that top-level metrics never capture the whole story. You have to stand in the lobby, talk to staff, and see the looks on customers' faces. One evening, after the rush died down, he lingered in the lobby. The once chaotic front desk looked calm and orderly, with staff chatting amicably during a lull. Housekeepers passed by without that frantic, exhausted pace. He felt a swelling sense of peace. The transformation was visible, but it also pulsed beneath the surface. Employees believed in it too. A young woman entered, carrying a small suitcase. She looked uncertain, explaining she was from the neighborhood and needed a room for a few days due to personal issues at home. Maurice watched as the desk agent smiled, asked for her ID, and booked her without hesitation. The relief on her face reminded him exactly why this mattered. By the time a full month had passed, the hotel seemed rejuvenated. Maurice, ready to step back into his broader corporate responsibilities, arranged one last all-hands meeting. They gathered in the lounge area, pulling chairs into a circle. He began by thanking them for their hard work, acknowledging how rapid change could be stressful. "I've watched you adapt," he said. "I've seen you tackle issues as a team." This is what hospitality is about. He announced that Pamela would remain general manager if she continued demonstrating empathetic leadership. He promised to stay in regular contact, scheduling monthly check-ins. If problems emerged, employees could reach him directly. He also invited them to keep innovating, from housekeeping improvements to community outreach events. Applause rippled through the group, along with a palpable sense of accomplishment. Glenn raised a hand, noting the possibility of hosting open house tours for local residents, letting them see the property's new vibe. Maurice loved the idea, encouraging him to work with Rebecca and Darius on planning. Linda suggested partnering with nearby businesses to offer package deals. People chimed in with excitement rather than dread. This shift in attitude marked the success of Maurice's mission. Wrapping up, he shared a childhood memory of his father, who once turned a neglected roadside inn into a welcoming haven just by showing kindness. "My father believed that every door we opened should be open to everyone," Maurice said. "Let's keep his spirit alive." Some employees wiped away tears touched by the sincerity. Others nodded, looking determined. The day after, Maurice strolled through each department, saying goodbyes. Glenn shook his hand, saying he finally felt proud to wear the housekeeping uniform. Rebecca thanked him for trusting her instincts. Jerome displayed a brand new set of tools the hotel had purchased, grinning at the chance to do proper maintenance. Even Darius admitted he liked the job more when he could actually help people. Each interaction confirmed to Maurice that the transformation was real. Before leaving, he noticed the same glass doors he'd entered weeks ago. The difference was immeasurable. Back then he felt an unsettling tension, a cold barrier between staff and guests. Now, the atmosphere held promise and genuine warmth. Stepping outside, he reflected on the lessons. Leadership by example, immediate action against toxicity, and unwavering faith in the potential for change. He sent a farewell email to the entire staff, urging them to maintain these standards and reminding them of the brand's original vision: treat every guest with humanity. Then he paused, recalling a crucial question he once posed to himself. How many leaders allow problems to fester because they assume everything is fine from a distance? He vowed never to make that mistake again. Several weeks later, a glowing review appeared online. A local teacher praised the hotel for letting her book a room during a stressful home renovation. She described the staff as supportive and empathetic. That review quickly gained traction, with multiple commenters noting the drastic change in policy. Maurice smiled as he read, proud that the place once notorious for turning locals away had become a symbol of open doors. He forwarded the link to key people across his company, encouraging them to remember that growth without values is hollow. He concluded the email with a single sentence: "We're in the business of caring for people, never forget that." Meanwhile, other employees shared smaller victories. A single father who lived nearby had been housed for 2 nights when his apartment flooded, and the staff treated him like any other guest. Such stories piled up, each reinforcing the principle that a good hotel doesn't discriminate. Corporate surveys also showed improvement in employee satisfaction, which correlated with higher guest approval. It proved the old adage that a happy team leads to happier customers. Revisiting his father's diary entries, Maurice felt an urge to spread these lessons further. He began drafting guidelines for the entire chain, emphasizing the importance of on-the-ground engagement. While data mattered, it wasn't enough. Regular site visits, undercover or otherwise, would ensure that each property upheld the core philosophy of welcoming people. News traveled among the other hotels in the portfolio. Some managers worried about stricter scrutiny, but many embraced the idea of more direct involvement from the CEO. They saw how quickly a dying environment could be revitalized when employees felt heard and valued. In response, Maurice authorized budget allocations for staff development, from front desk etiquette workshops to housekeeping training. He believed in investing in people, confident that any short-term cost would yield long-term loyalty and performance. In that sense, the transformation of this once dysfunctional property became a blueprint for positive change across his chain. Near the end of his extended stay in the city, Maurice decided to drop by the hotel one final time unannounced. Dressed again in casual clothes, he walked into the lobby. The same floor still gleamed, but the mood was different. Rebecca, busy checking someone in, waved happily when she saw him. A new hire offered to help him with directions. Guests moved about with an air of ease. Soft music still played, but it felt welcoming rather than superficial. Everything hinted at deeper progress. Maurice strolled around, noticing a group of locals in the cafe area enjoying coffee and pastries. They weren't here under suspicion, but by invitation. Pamela emerged from behind the desk, gave him a bright smile, then returned to assisting a guest who needed event space for a community fundraiser. The sight of her calmly coordinating these details drove home the fact that good leadership empowered staff at every level. As he lingered, memory tugged at him. That first day, he'd been turned away for being local. Now, no one would even dream of such a practice. The brand's heart, nearly lost, beat strongly again. He left the lobby with a renewed sense of purpose, taking a final look at the property that had tested his resolve. This episode taught him that success in hospitality isn't just about profit margins or occupancy rates. It's about trust, respect, and genuine care for guests and employees. In the broader scope, it reminded him how easy it is for leaders to become blind to real problems. A fancy lobby can't hide a toxic culture forever. Real leadership demands stepping in, listening to unfiltered truths, and taking decisive, sometimes uncomfortable action. As he walked down the bustling city street, he contemplated the future. He would incorporate these lessons into every corner of his organization. If any manager dared enforce discriminatory policies, they'd be swiftly dealt with. If employees complained about resources, he'd investigate without delay. He realized that being a Black CEO who understood the pain of exclusion gave him a unique responsibility to ensure no customer endured what he once faced. Glancing back at the hotel's sign, he felt satisfaction in knowing it no longer betrayed his father's legacy. It stood as a testament to the power of transparency, empathy, and accountability. He couldn't change the past, but he had righted a significant wrong. In the end, the biggest takeaway was that meaningful transformation arises from genuine concern for people. It's a message that resonates far beyond one hotel or one city. Treat others with dignity, listen to your frontline workers, and never shy away from tackling systemic problems head-on. That was the lesson Maurice hoped would echo through every hallway, from the housekeeping closet to the penthouse suite. One final thought flickered in his mind, that leadership is more than delegating tasks. It's about embracing responsibility for everyone's well-being. If he could make that sentiment the beating heart of his entire chain, perhaps he'd honor his father's dream and create a new legacy of his own, one in which no guest is ever turned away at the door simply because of where they come from or who they are. His father once said, "The front door of your business should be as open as your heart." Maurice intended to keep it that way for good. We hope this story, whether real or fictional, inspires you in some way. Stories spark hope. That's why we share them. May it remind you to lead with kindness, stand up for what's right, and believe in the power of change. Thanks for watching.